mean, these are really just the beginning of conversations, and I encourage you to touch base with Matt and have conversations about all of these issues. And thinking about the afternoon, think about how the coalition maybe can play a role in promoting positive, constructive conversations for faculty, for administrators, for students, and across higher education. Next on the program, we have a conversation, panel conversation about the kinds of things that in some ways we just talked about, which is spreading good ideas across the college campus. Angela Lindner is going to come up with 3 panelists, which I'll introduce. Please come on up, and I'll introduce them and let them talk about how to navigate institutional cultural change. That is certainly something that the coalition is all about. Trying to create cultural change, transformation on college campuses. That is always a challenge. That is always a challenge. Many of our member institutions have started small programs, which we and they hope will grow. I think we've got some good examples of programs that are growing or have grown, and we're going to talk about that. So let me introduce Angela first. Dr. Angela Lindner is currently the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Affairs and an Associate Professor of Engineering Education at the University of Florida. She has a bachelor's degree in chemistry from the College of Charleston in South Carolina, master's degree in chemical engineering from Texas A&M University, and a PhD in environmental engineering from the University of Michigan. Dr. Lindner has been a driving force behind the University of Florida QUEST program, which is a comprehensive general education program spanning all 4 years of undergraduate study. And she's been a tremendous supporter of the coalition. She gave a tremendous talk at our national conference, and she's been the leader in the learning community as well that's happening at the University of Florida, and we were greatly thankful for her to lead this panel. And the panelists, and I'll let them talk more about themselves, we have Michael Leon Bradford, who's Vice Provost and Dean for Undergraduate Education and Professor of Dramatic Arts at the University of California, Davis, on the far end. Laura Perrill, who's the 4D Executive Director at the University of Denver, here on my end. And Joe Tranquillo, who's the Associate Provost for Transformative Teaching and Learning and a Professor at Bucknell University. Angela, please. Nope. Yeah, we'll make it happen.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Keith. I just want to begin by thanking all of you for being here. Some of us are at the leading edge of these questions that came from over here in states that are at the leading edge, and we're asking these questions all the time. And our emails are blowing up right now with exercises that we're being asked to do that are due tomorrow. I cannot thank this coalition and all of you enough. You're the antidote to cynicism. Not just coming to these meetings, but we carry all of this inspiration and the mission of the coalition with us in our day-to-day. So just thank you, Keith, Dana, Rick Miller, the leadership team. It means a tremendous amount to all of us. And I want to thank our panelists today. And as I was reflecting on all of the work, the tremendous work that you've done on your campuses, I was almost overwhelmed just thinking of the efforts that it took to institute your programs. I want to ask all of you to refer to the resources provided you with more detail about these programs. We won't go into great detail today, and unless it's in response to some of the questions. But I want to just start by reading a quote, and this came to me when I was on the plane with my husband coming from Gainesville, in a book that's totally different, and I'm going deep trying to figure out how to live the next 4 years. And so The Great Tree of Life, and is taught by 2 faculty members from University of Florida, and it's about biodiversity and mapping all species, genes, and our relation to each other. But the quote in the chapter about the biodiversity moonshot, because we've only captured 17%, okay, of our species. I think is appropriate to the work of the coalition, and especially the work that you all have done on your campuses. And it will sound familiar, especially to those of us who are older, to remember speeches that might have occurred 1960s, 1962 in this case. This is the moonshot speech that came from President Kennedy. And just listen to this quote and put it in the context of what the coalition is asking us to do in higher education. So this was delivered at Rice University, on a university campus. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure, Rick will like that one, will measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win. So I think a lot about the work that you have done and you're continuing to do on your campus with that spirit, right? You have had to go against culture at times on your campus and work to build consensus. Just like you were saying, Matt, the work is messy and mistakes will be made. We all have our stories with this. It's hard work. So I would like for us to think of this today as a beginning of a conversation. There will be a coalition formed in this coalition of institutional culture change, and we invite all of you to join in this, even if your institutions have not yet begun the work of culture change in major programming on your campus that goes at scale, that is student-centered and centered on lifelong well-being. Consider it a resource of support and solidarity, but also best practices and lessons learned. So maybe we can broker and break down some of the barriers more quickly. So I'll jump into the first question for you all. So developing these programs like the Life Transforming Education in Connecticut, Michael, the Thrive Framework at Bucknell, and the 4D experience, Laura, it was heavy lifting. And I can tell in just reading the details of the program. So can you describe what core elements that you think are essential regardless of the institution type, size, enrollment size, for successfully shifting institutional culture towards these student-centered, well-being-focused models?
I guess I can start. Because I have a microphone. Is this on? Yeah. Okay. First of all, I have to say what a pleasure it is to be on this panel. Joe and I have been joking since the conference back in March that we needed a support group for the work that we do. So this is great to be in this conversation. When I was reflecting on this question, I was thinking about something that I'd heard Amelia Parnell, who's the new director of NASPA, say in terms of how do we think about large-scale change? And she's talked about 3 C's. She's talked about clarity, connection, and consistency. So clarity in terms of thinking about what is the why behind what we're doing? How does it relate to the institutional mission? I think what I heard in terms of some of the earlier conversations that we often have initiative fatigue, where people are like, oh, here we go again, here's another thing, and being able to say and package what this work is in terms of like, this is why we're here. This is our big dream as an institution, this is our dream for our students, and for our community, and that's why we're doing what we're doing. With connection, thinking about how does this work relate to the different constituencies and audiences on our campuses. So students, how are we thinking about how this makes their lives more meaningful? How are we thinking about how this relates to the work of faculty? What's in it for them? I think this is what Aaron was getting at too, in terms of how does this enrich their pedagogy and practice? And how does this make a difference in their lives with staff who also feel overwhelmed? How is this improving the work that they do and making them feel connected to the institution? And alumni, and you can go on. I mean, thinking about all these different audiences, but then also connection in terms of across these groups. So how does this work better create a collaborative ecosystem that's thinking about how our work all relates to some larger mission. I think silos are probably not, like, I think we all have silos at our institutions, and thinking about how this work is a really powerful way of breaking down silos, of bringing people to the table to think about shared challenges. And then the final one is consistency. So thinking about how are we continuing to reiterate, once again, the why. We have a newsletter that we send out to all faculty and staff on our campus, and every time we start with the same description of this is why we're doing what we're doing. Because sometimes I think they say it takes 10 times for someone to like really get it. I mean, it's true. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times we've engaged with some, the same kind of populations, and finally on the 5th time, they're like, oh my God. Like, oh yeah, this makes so much sense. And you're like, okay, I'm glad it only took like the 5th or 6th time to get there. And then the one that I would add to this is not a C word, but it's authenticity. Because our initiative, our members of our team were brought in the summer of 2021 to think about this. And you think about, that was after the pandemic. People were feeling completely overwhelmed. I mean, they still do. Anxious and worried were the words that people were throwing out. And at that time, to go to our community and say, we are focused on student thriving, felt a little bit disingenuous when we weren't also recognizing the elephant in the room, which is the people who are in charge of delivering and creating the context and environments for student thriving did not feel like they were thriving. And so a lot of the work and strategy that we undertook was helping faculty and staff see how they were part of this, that we were talking about them too, and that in doing this work together and creating that kind of ecosystem and collaboration, we were attuned to our faculty and staff sense of purpose and well-being too. And I think that really changed the story. I mean, obviously we still have our detractors, as I think we all probably do, but making people feel like they were part of it, and that we wanted to have these conversations with them, not only for their sense of well-being and creating a more resilient community, but those people who saw the relevance for themselves were more likely to buy in and think about this is why this is important for students. So thinking about those 3 C's and the authenticity as being critical components to doing this kind of large-scale change.
Wait, do I really have to follow that? Yes, all of that. So I'll add to that. I think one, as the person or people as a group that's trying to actually institute this change, actually having some sort of a change model underlying what you're doing. I don't want to say it doesn't matter what it is. For me, right, I use Diffusion of Innovations. I use some of John Cotter's work. There's immunities to change, right? So if you looking around the room, seeing some nods and some folks like, oh yeah, I know that work, right? I didn't pick any one particular one of those, but I actually had an underlying model of how I wanted to actually go about change. And I think a lot of those things align really well with what was just said. So that's one as me personally. The other was, it's really easy when you look at university measures, whatever those are, you know, you're trying to change culture and you have folks up at the top or near the top talking about, well, we do need to do something about the retention rate or enrollment or yield, or, right? Like name any university measure, right? And you're a university president, right? Like this is what you live and eat and breathe all the time, right? These numbers, and you need to pay attention to those because the folks above you are saying, are those numbers all moving in the right direction? The catch is, and I'll just pick on retention rate for a minute, I can't go up to someone on my campus and say, what are you doing to make the retention rate go up, right? Like, that's such a high-level thing. There's no way that one person can do that. This is where, for us, a framework came into play. Something that could help show a vision, a shared vision of what we're trying to do, but then you can drill down to the specifics and have individual conversations with people, with small groups about, I'm not asking you to do everything in the framework. I'm not asking you to solve the enrollment or the demographic. I'm not asking you to do that. That's mine and the folks above me's role. I'm asking you to do something small. Let's sit down and talk about what that is. And so it was through lots of conversations with lots of different people. The thing I will say, and I'll pick up on the folks who are resistant, totally agree. It's being persistent to some degree and actually meeting with those folks. I call them the cave dwellers, the colleagues against virtually everything, right? You all know who those people are on your campus, right? But invite those folks in, and I think converting just a couple of those folks, the ones who are willing to stand up at the faculty meeting or to send the inflammatory email or whatever, meeting with those folks and finding a bright spot. finding something that they're already doing that is moving in the direction that you want them to do, and then pointing it out. There's nothing more than those colleagues against virtually everything want more than to be highlighted in some fashion, like, look at the cool work that person's doing, right? That is so awesome, that's really cool. And guess what? Doesn't always work, but you've probably just gained an ally. And so again, I think we often focus on the coalition of the willing, and we should do that too. We often forget that one or two people that can actually be a really loud vocal opponent against it, if you capture those folks, it makes it easier and gives permission to the other folks to actually join in. So again, this is the fusion of innovations, if any of you want that. So I'm going to stop there because I know we have more insights.
I don't know how I could have any more insight than what's already been talked about. Let me just first say there's no intentional plan I have ever had that landed me in this position. I have no clue how I got here. As a playwright and a director, it is, we don't need to go any further into that. So I will just say I will take a little bit of a different tack than the conversation that has just been had, because I think change is difficult, you know, whether I'm thinking about the adaptability model, and you know, that's really the only one I'm very familiar with, or whether we're thinking about an institution-wide or scaling up, or whatever the case may be. Change is just difficult. In this institution that understands that change is necessary, we could go 20 years without changing a policy and say, oh, that policy from 1977 still stands, and I think it's all right. The one thing I will say, or a couple things that I will say, is that leadership is important. Leadership is hugely important. The LTE, introduction of LTE at the University of Connecticut happened because we had a president who came in the door and said, this is important. Now, the reality is, not quite sure exactly how we're going to institute this across this campus. It's kind of hard to taste, touch, or feel, but we are talking about students' lives. We're talking about not only their experience here at the university, but how they're going to impact the world in the way they want to impact the world when they leave the university. And can we give them that? Can we help them with that? Can we support them with that? So when we think about the earlier monikers, identity, agency, and purpose, I found those to be hugely important, because it certainly felt to me that in the past 20 years, universities, large and small, came to an understanding that the need to diversify the student body is not just for federal funding or whatever the case may be. There's a need because our intellectual capacity can be deeply impacted by inviting these really different lived experiences into our university. Now, while we have done that, and I think we have done a decent job, I don't want to get too happy about that. I think we've done a decent job about that. At the same time, it's my argument, we didn't really think about that in the staff space so much. We didn't think about that in the faculty space so much. We didn't think about that in the pedagogical space too much. And so I find myself and many of my colleagues are thinking about what is the level of change that is necessary in order to appreciate, leverage, and support these different identities that have now come into our university that is really making us who we are. At UC Davis, I don't know how many times I hear, you wouldn't have recognized us 10 years ago. Our transformation in 10 years is amazing. I sit at graduation, and it's just an international pageant of folks coming across that stage. So I love it. So we realize change is necessary. I think we all realize that change is necessary. But the difficulty is really getting people to say what you did 20 years ago, how you taught 20 years ago, the administrative policies, the academic policies that we have in place for 20 years ago is really a square peg in a round hole right now. And we really need to figure out how to shave that peg off a little bit. I've got a little bitty knife. It's not dangerous. It's not even all that sharp. It's going to take us a while to shave that square into that circle. Forgive me for my playwriting. And we're going to find a way, right, to make it fit. That is a really difficult proposition, even when people understand that that is the case. And so oftentimes, we're dealing with colleagues who say, what I did 20 years ago was successful. It's not me, it's the student. they're unprepared, they're this, they're coming from high schools that are not resourced. We should think really much more about our enrollment policies and any number of reasons, but dig it so it may forever be dug. When you say you are enrolled, it is now your responsibility. So change is absolutely necessary. The cohort of the willing, I find to be the easiest inroad into that space, but institutional change, cultural change, academic change, those are difficulty, and we have to understand we're playing the long game. As Simon Sinek talks about the life game, we're playing the life game. We're playing the long game, in support of these particular students. And so, whatever model that you're using, whichever one seems to kind of fit that particular situation, understanding that you have to talk to those folks who are not in the vein of changing. We send out, we collect a lot of data. Everybody's in the world, I think, like Miss Piggy's got access to that data. Everybody can access that data, but we are engaged in a process where we are sending out student outcome data to department chairs and deans in a way that they can consume it easier, just so they understand what their outcomes are. You could have accessed that yesterday and the day before, but now we're giving it to you because we know you're not. And you're not really thinking about that. And we're asking you to do anything with that. We're just hoping that your moral center will say, oh, I really need to do something about this. Because at some point in time, it's going to be tied to money. That's just our reality. UC System in California has a compact with the state, 2030 compact with the state. It's around academic metrics, right? So that's going to be tied to money coming to the university. That's going to be tied for money coming from the provost out to the deans. It's going to be tied to money. But we're hoping that you say, this really is not about money. This is about that student that's coming in front of me in my class, and I want to make sure they enter in the world in the way that they want to enter into the world. We've given them the tools in order to do that. So I don't think I came in the same kind of mode, but just talking about the difficulty of change, but also at the same time the necessity.
Well, I think it's a great segue into my next question, and I'll start with you, Michael. You talked about data, so you opened up that Pandora's box.
I'm sorry.
Okay. How do we assess, and how have you found in your experience with the Life Transformative Education Task Force at the University of Connecticut and then shifting over to UC Davis, what are successful models for assessing these types of programs, right, that maybe are capturing data that are not in the traditional toolbox for universities?
I think it's really hard. I mean, you think about the first destination report that goes out before, that you get before students graduate, right before they graduate, and then after they go out into the world, accessing alumni entities that help you kind of collect some of that data when they get out into the world. The biggest thing on my end, and surveys, of course, the biggest thing on my end is that if you haven't created some kind of a relationship with that student before they leave out, right? If you have just said, well, I taught you, you got a grade, you did graduate, I did my deal, did my job. If you haven't created that kind of relationship that we talked about earlier, where people have had a transformational experience with somebody at that university, you're not going to get anything back from when they leave the door. And I'm not talking about foundation money or whatever the case may be. I'm talking about just an understanding that something happened to me there that changed my directory. A faculty member, a mentor, a staff member said, that's a door, and you said that's a wall, and they said, trust me, it's a door, and you went there and you pushed it and it was a door. If that didn't happen for you, having a conversation with you when you leave is really not going to be happening. So there are, I think, a number of entities to try to help us get to this really amorphous thing about how I feel about how you have supported my transition into life, or how I define success into life. I think there are a number of vehicles in order to do that, but I think what's most important is figuring out how we impact their lives and their identity, agency, and purpose while they're with us.
That's wonderful. Well, this one is for you, Laura. At University of Denver, you have the 4D model, right? And it spans intellectual growth, well-being, character, and purpose. So the question I have is, what strategies have been effective in embedding these into your culture, right? And could you answer today that it is within all of your campus? Would a faculty member say, yes, I know those four, and what are the struggles in trying to do that?
Yeah, this is a very complex question, as many things are. I think something that we were up against, and I maybe shared, is that when 4D was rolled out just over 3 years ago, it was concepts of a plan, and the perception of this being like a top-down initiative, and it was something that we had to do a lot to rewind and think about, what does this actually mean for our different constituents? So what does purpose mean? What does well-being mean? What does character mean for our students and also for our faculty and staff? So something that we've done, and it kind of is getting at how are students internalizing these things, is because we found that if you go to a student and say like purpose and character, that doesn't necessarily compute. And we spend a lot of time doing focus groups and interviews with students by getting at that, but not by using those terms, by saying, what were your aha moments? Or what were your muddy moments? Or when did you feel most connected and feel like you could most be yourself? And those responses were giving us insight into how our Gen Z students were thinking about these concepts in a way we could reflect back to them to better connect this to their experiences, I think, in a really meaningful way that was allowing us to gauge that. And we've also integrated questions at the end of some of our new experiences that we have. We have a new immersive mountain campus weekend, and at the end of that experience, we asked students, this whole experience was a 4D experience. With that in mind, what does 4D mean to you? And we get some really meaningful reflections of students saying, wow, college is more than a degree. It's about learning and failing and making sense of where you can go. And that's been meaningful. I think from faculty and staff perspective, something that we did to think about how these values and these elements of these dimensions are already present in their work is we created a 4D taxonomy. So it breaks down purpose, well-being, character, and intellectual growth into habits of thinking and doing and skills and competencies that was drawing upon our institutional outcomes, was drawing upon NACE outcomes, was drawing upon ACNU. So we created a whole taxonomy that was getting into habits of thinking and doing in collaboration with campus partners so that people could see how they were already plugging into this. So not expecting everyone to do all dimensions equally at any one time, but to say, oh, I help my students navigate ambiguity. Okay, I do that. Or I help my students understand how to learn from setbacks, or so that people could see where they were already mapping into this in a way that was reflective of people's work, a way of acknowledging those connections and then moving into how they could build upon those. And the last thing I will say relates to what I said earlier, is something we found is the authenticity thing about how are we helping faculty and staff understand what these concepts mean and then be able to think about how it's embedded in their classrooms and their programs. We launched a design series that's designing for purpose, belonging, well-being. Now we have compassion, curiosity, courage, all these things that map to our dimensions that create space for people to think about what is purpose for you? And we've had tears. I mean, this has gotten into some really meaningful conversations, and it helps them think about what this means in the context of their own lives, and then opens up a collaborative problem-solving and discussion space to think about how do we make small changes. Not once again, we're not asking you to change your entire syllabus or change your entire program, but what are small changes that you have the power to affect in your respective spaces that move the needle a little bit, that help design for the why, or help students, feel that sense of connection and clarity with what they're doing in their classroom. That makes that feel organic in a way and not something that's arbitrarily enforced, but creates that space for dialogue and discussion, which makes it feel like everybody owns this together.
That's wonderful. Thank you. This one is for you, Joe. And I think this is probably our last question if we want to stay on time. Yeah. So I'm going to be sneaky here, and I'm going to ask you a question that sort of combines a couple of questions. So first of all, my understanding is that there's about 300 activities within the Thrive framework. And so the first question I have is, how do you ensure consistency of quality, alignment, that communication is taken across campus? But then the second part of this, in which I think a lot about, just given my age and time and career, in my experience in setting up UF Quest, how do you move out of a place of this is Angela Lindner's program, this is Joe Tranquillo's program, to everyone owning it, right?
Oh boy, you answered the first question with your second question,
Yeah, okay,
I think,
okay.
which is awesome. And so I think what I would say is, number one, yes, 300 initiatives. That was a task force that I helped put together.
Mm-hmm.
Those were 300 university level initiatives. There's actually tons more initiatives that are out there. And so what I would say is it was yes, we're doing university level initiatives and we're talking about those. But then I went and found those bright spots, those examples of here are examples of what individuals or small groups, whether it's a department or a division on campus, here's an example of something that's already happening, and then challenging other departments, individuals to say, how could you do that too? Or something similar. It doesn't have to be the same thing. And then I think we've heard a number of times that cross-fertilization. Finding those venues where you can get people who are doing this work to actually talk to one another. And so there have been a number of times that I've said, you should really talk to the physics department because they're doing this really cool thing with belonging in their first year courses. Or you know what? The bursar's office has fundamentally changed the way they actually interact with students when they come to the window, right? And that wasn't one of the 300 Thrive initiatives. That was something that in a 1-hour conversation with the bursar's office, we explored together, right? Here's the big high-level framework. Where could you plug in? Where could you be a little bright spot in a student's day, right? Yes, we know you got to take care of the bursar's office stuff, right? But what could you do? Same thing with our campus safety.
Nice.
Campus safety has changed a number of things. And so I'm going to actually share something because you'd asked this. You probably noticed, I study other change movements on campus. You can learn a lot by looking at other things on your campus to see what things were effective. One of the things I noticed in the sustainability world was they printed out little cards that explain what they were trying to do and sum up what they were trying to do. Anytime I go and talk with a group or give a presentation or talk, I hand out these cards and say, it may not have hit you today. It might not hit you a week from now. But 6 months from now, when it does hit, do something, right? And let me know. The other piece was some of the Thrive initiatives were, at the university level, were meant to be individual things that people could do, little challenges. So I'll just give you one example of it. One of the pillars of Thrive is belonging. One of the initiatives was what we ended up calling a 10-foot challenge. Anytime you're on campus and you're walking through a building or a hallway, or you're walking on campus and you happen to pass a student and you're about 10 feet from them or less, try to make eye contact.
Nice.
There's a number of them that are going to be on their phone, right? They're not going to make eye contact. But there are actually students that will make eye contact with you. And when they do, make eye contact back, right? And if you feel up to it that day, say hello. Right? Or how you do it, right? Like literally just show them a little bit of humanity, even if you don't actually know who they are. Now, I've gone out and looked, there are people who are doing it, but here's the catch with an initiative like that. Even if 10% of people do it, it makes a difference, right? So that was such a simple thing. It costs no money at all, right? And it's something that an individual can actually do. The other piece that I'll add to this, and this is like, we're talking about levers and systems, is you are right on. Funding matters. Our budgets actually tell a bit about what we value, right? At high levels, at mid levels, at low levels. I apologize. I will actually be leaving this a little bit early because I'm out on the road fundraising. Donors love hearing about this work. And so what I've been able to do is raise some funds that are dedicated to the Thrive program. And what I've been able to do with that, and it goes to the MVP idea, is there's now a Thrive Innovation Fund. And I put out a call and say, hey, if you have a really cool idea, I'm going to sit down with you, we'll workshop it, we'll play with it. It's meant to be a prototype, and I will be your initial seed funding. Don't ask me for $100,000. I don't have that, right? What I do have is a couple $100 to try something. So that's the spirit of it. And all places from all over the place come and say, you know what, I have this really cool idea. Can we help workshop it, right? So again, getting that momentum going so it's not exactly my ideas anymore, or even the university level ideas. Now, here's the piece that I'm curious if these folks also share this. It's not mine anymore.
Yes.
And like, intellectually, that's like, this is it, right? That's awesome, right?
Yes,
It worked,
yes,
right? Like,
that's
it's
right.
now, that is actually the purest sign that it's embedded in the culture is folks are not checking in for permission from me anymore to see if they could or should do something. They're just doing it. But to be totally honest, like, personally, yeah, it hurts a little bit, right? Like, you know, I hear my president and other folks talking about, you know, oh, Bucknell's all about thriving, right? And it's like, well, that's great, but like that was mine. Just kind of stole that, right? So again, I think we probably need to move on.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, we are human, and so that's beautiful. So this is a taste of what is to come, I believe, in this learning community, institutional culture change. Many, many more questions I think that you can help us navigate as we're amid our at-scale programs or contemplating them. So again, this is an encouragement. Broadcast this back to your institutions. There will be more information to come from Dana and Keith about how to join in. But I can't be more grateful for keeping us pointed towards the moon, you guys, with your programs. This has just been remarkable learning from you. So thank you.